Good morning. I'm so thankful that you joined us today. I think you probably remember this just ordinary box last week, and we talked about the big idea of God gives extraordinary peace with Gideon. Today's big idea comes from this ordinary box. God gives extraordinary strength. Have you ever done something that you knew was right, even though you were very afraid or a little bit scared? Maybe you stood up for somebody who was being bullied, or maybe you went up to a friend and told them about Jesus, even though you thought that they might laugh at you and you were afraid. Well, today's story comes from the book of Joshua, about a man named Joshua. Let's talk about the books of the Bibles together. It begins with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. Now Joshua did something that he knew was right, even though he was very afraid to do it. Sometime after God rescued the Israelites from Egypt, God chose Joshua to lead them to a place called Canaan. It was a promised place. It was an amazing place. There was a city there named Jericho. Now, Jericho had huge walls, and it was very locked up tight. And Joshua knew he couldn't just go into Jericho and take over the whole city on his own. He was very afraid. Now, do you remember last week we talked about how an angel had visited Gideon? He let Gideon know that God was with him, and he was given that peace. Gideon received peace knowing that God was with him. Well, an angel appeared to Joshua as well. This angel helped Joshua to realize that God was going to be with him, that God was going to help him to lead the Israelites into Jericho. In Joshua, it says, "Be strong and be very courageous." Now, this was God talking to Joshua. It says, "I will be with you." God told Joshua to be strong and to be courageous. He said, "Don't be afraid and don't be discouraged because I'm going to be with you." Joshua didn't need to be afraid. But Joshua wasn't sure how he was going to get into Jericho and take over this city. So this is what God's plan was. You were supposed to march around the city one time every day for 6 days. Have 7 priests carrying ram's horns with them. Then on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. And then the priests are to take those ram's horns and blow into them and shout. Then God told Joshua the walls will fall down. Okay, so let's get this straight. They didn't have weapons. They're just supposed to march around the city and blow on trumpets. And the walls are going to fall down? Okay, let's think about this. When you go to a baseball game, you take your baseball glove and your baseball bat and the correct shoes. And when you go into a garden, you get your garden gloves, the right tools, you get your shovel and your rake. And when you go into battle, you usually take armor, like a shield and a sword, not a ram's horn. But that was God's plan. They were to go around the city and march, and they were to blow into their ram's horns like trumpets, and God was going to be with them, and the city walls were going to fall down. Do you think that worked? Well, it did. Now, Joshua probably had thoughts going through his head, like, is this going to work? Is this going to happen? But Joshua trusted God, and he led his people and followed God's plan. On that 7th day, they marched around that city, and they blew on their ram's horns, and they shouted, and the walls fell down. Now, there's a little bit of a side story here. Do you remember a lady by the name of Rahab? She was the lady who took a risk that hid some of the Israelites in her home when they came as spies to see how they could take over Jericho. When they left, they told her, "You need to take a red or scarlet rope and put it in your window. And when we come to take over Jericho, you need to place that in your window and God will protect you and your family." So Rahab did that. And when the Israelites came to take over Jericho, Rahab and her family were saved. Now Joshua probably wondered how marching around the city and yelling would make walls fall down, but he didn't question God. When those walls began to fall, Joshua knew exactly that God had given him extraordinary strength to do amazing things. We know that God helped Joshua to save the Israelites. Now Rahab, she's in the family line of Jesus. And Jesus saved you and me by coming to this earth and dying for our sins. In this story, Joshua was the one who was chosen to save the Israelites. Years later, someone else was chosen to save the world. Do you know who that was? His name is Jesus. I'm so glad you came and joined me today. Following this lesson, there will be some questions that are put on the screen. Go over them with your family and have a great week.